Get ready for the Ochelli Effect.
I'm a big fan of the show.
Chuck Ochelli, and he's been known for many years as a blind JFK researcher specializing in intelligence agency involvement in multiple assassination, propaganda, and other global criminal operations in the 20th and 21st centuries.
Your listeners are extremely fortunate to have you, and everybody at AFR I know loves you, man.
We should learn from our relatively recent history, my brother. That's where I'm coming from. I say all power to the people.
And now, the most underrated voice in all media. The alternative's alternative. Chuck Ochelli.
7th day of October 2016, allegedly, according to that thing we call a calendar. This is the Ochelli Effect, which does originate at AmericanFreedomRadio.com. I do appreciate you guys tuning in, no matter how it is you have encountered the show. We are replayed on other networks, though. One of my most favorite, by the way, is RaconteursNews.com. And we've had Tony Hurst on this show. We've had Andy Young on this show. Today, Andy Young is flying solo because usually I have Tony and Andy together. Should I even dispense with any other comments for today? No, I'm going to keep it under control because I don't want to drive Andy away. I know I've changed my attitude in recent times here, but Andy is one of the coolest guys I've encountered as a broadcaster, as a level-headed thinker, and just really an all-around great guy. Never met him face to face yet, but who knows? One of these days I may have to leap across the pond if the U.S. government ever allows me to have my passport back. We might someday meet. Who knows? Maybe Andy will come to America. Wouldn't that be something? How you doing, Andy?
I'm doing great, thanks, Chuck, and thanks for inviting us back on. Yeah, it'd be great to meet up sometime, because it's fantastic talking with people on Skype and social media and on the radio, but there is really no substitute for meeting up and having a good old hug, is there?
Well, that's true. And, the fact is I really respect what you guys are doing over there. I appreciate it. That's for sure. Now, Raconteurs is a little difficult to spell for some of the Americans who, forgot how to spell anyway as soon as autocorrect came out. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about what goes on over there before we really start with the conversation. And I forget to plug the website and everything. So could you do that for us, Andy?
Yeah, sure, Chuck. Well, we were just a bunch of guys and a lady who we were kind of on the fringes of alternative radio, and we kind of saw an opportunity and decided to go it alone and set up our own station. And there was 5 of us initially, and that 5 has now grown so that there's about I think there's 6 different shows on air during the week. Plus, of course, we've got the Ochelli Effect that we restream every 5 to 7 p.m. in our time, because it goes out at 1 to 3 a.m. Live, so an awful lot of our listeners will miss that. So I think streaming it at tea time for us is quite a good way to go. And we've got some more hosts coming on board anytime soon.
Also interesting, we've seen some reactions from you guys. It goes out on the if you look under Spreaker, I know a lot of people like to use Spreaker, and I don't have a Spreaker account. But the fact is, the Ochelli Effect is available on Spreaker because Raconteurs News puts it up there on Spreaker, guys. So, I know a lot of you guys like that, and some people have become very happy with the idea that it's there at least. I don't know how many people are actually playing it or anything. I don't look at the stats, but it is very cool that you guys are doing that, and I'm extremely grateful to be working with you guys, that's for sure. And like I said, it's always interesting because how do you end up on the fringe of alternative media, right? It's like you don't set out with that goal in mind, do you, Andy? You have this idea that you want to do something different, obviously. You don't want to be part of the corporate claptrap of nonsense that goes out there as a general rule. You don't want to be part of the government-controlled stuff directly. I mean, in the UK, to me, the BBC is the BBC. Yes, very interesting, very ubiquitous. Everywhere you go is something BBC, fine, dandy. That's the way it used to be. But everybody seems to forget that, when the government controls the media, that you're only going to get one side of the story related to a lot of, well, things that go on in the world, And, go ahead.
Well, as far as never planning to go this way, Chuck, it was really strange for me because I had no desire or plans to talk on the radio ever. And suddenly 2 years ago, I was listening to another radio station which now has gone by the by, and I was asked if I got any suggestions for guests by the station owner, and I said, well, yeah, here's a few people I'd be interested in. And my particular chosen field at that time of day was the UFO field, and he said, oh, I'm not very well up on that subject. Will you perhaps help me out with the interviews? I said, yeah, sure, I'll send you a list of questions. He went, oh, no, come on air. And, oh, that's a bit weird. I don't know if I could do that. Oh, well, I'll give it a bash. And 2 years later, here we are.
Yeah, and you do have a great voice for radio. I love the tone, the texture of your voice is good. I'm like a judge of voices. I'm nuts. I have this idea that I really appreciate certain tones. There used to be a standard when it came to broadcast where you had to have kind of a deep voice and all that. I mean, I don't have any of that. Mine is all, gravelly and nasty sounding. So there you go. Very few of us can be, the guy who does Caravan to Midnight, Not everybody can do that, Mr. Wells. Incredible voice. Not necessarily saying I dig every single thing he does, but, what are you going to do?
Oh, yeah. John B. Wells has got an incredible voice, and I'm really quite shocked that only a few weeks ago my voice was compared to his own. What the hell? I don't sound like him.
No, you almost sound like you were one of the guys. I mean, I could literally picture your voice being on an archival piece of footage related to the Beatles and talking about how they used to play down at the... that's what I picture when I hear your voice, like as if you're one of these guys who was working at some unnamed recording studio before they had Golden Apple or Abbey Road or any of that. Hey, what are you going to do? It's interesting. But I picture you going, yeah, so I saw them come up and they were on stage, and I cannot do a British accent. I used to be able to, but I saw them come up on stage and they were quite interesting. And, now you're just smooth like that, and you do have a deep voice. So, I mean, I could see you being a regular broadcaster. It's interesting to me though that you came out of this UFO kind of area. Because honestly, you're not like one of the guys that I picture being involved directly in the UFO thing.
No, well, it is something that's kind of been an interest of mine from being a child. But the weird thing was, I was never quite sure why I was so fascinated with it. It was just something that really, really appealed to me, that had done for years. And it wasn't until I was watching a documentary about 5 years ago, and I heard the phrase, a blue ball of light, and it was like a 40-foot wave came washing over me when I suddenly remembered the incident that happened to me when I was 12 years old. I was with a friend. We saw a blue sphere of light hovering over a road junction about 100 yards away from us when we were out on a bicycle ride. And it just sat there for what seemed like a couple of minutes, and then kind of grew in intensity and shot off, and it was a dot on the horizon within half a second. But I'd completely forgotten about that for 35 years. And no recollection of it whatsoever, even though I'd had a couple of small sightings in between. I had no idea that had happened to me. So it's almost like there's some kind of element of predestiny. It's like somehow my life's mapped out for me, and it goes really well when I just kind of go with the flow and join in with the way it's supposed to be going. But when I try and make plans and do things my way, it never seems to go the way I want.
Well, but it's interesting to me because you guys do a news show constantly, right? What is it? The Unsweetened News with you and Jason Holmes, I think, and Tony sometimes, right?
Yeah. Tony's pretty busy, and he doesn't tend to get on the air that much. But sometimes if it's a particular subject that Tony's well up on, or if Jason's having a night off, then Tony will come in and join us, yeah. But, Tony's specialist is cannabis. He's very knowledgeable on that subject, and he's taught Rick Simpson a thing or two when we've had Rick on in the past.
Wow. Okay. I've only ever been able to interview Rick one time, and I was working with Angela Foreman. She had a show on AFR briefly on the weekends, and I joined into her show, and that's how I've never actually had Rick to myself yet. But it's really interesting. It is endless what one can learn about cannabis, that's for sure. But again, see, this is weird because really I haven't had that many conversations with Tony about that. You know, you guys, when I get together with you guys, what seems to happen a lot is we wind up discussing, you know, the global politic du jour, okay? And then it ends up in some sort of a discussion about social issues, and the next thing you know, I mean, I don't even know where the hell we went, but none of us have discussed our specialties at all. You know, none of us have discussed, we just wind up kind of getting together as three guys who just seem to have been brought together by the internet gods to have a diverse conversation. And I've got a different attitude. I run my mouth a lot. You guys are a lot more relaxed, you know, and it's really this interesting dynamic. I'd love anytime you guys invite me on there, you know, I always come, you know, because it's just a good time, first of all, and there's always tons of information, you know.
Oh, yeah. Well, we cover as many different subjects as we can, and basically anybody who we think hasn't got a voice and should be given one is the sort of person that we try and get on. We do have some of the kind of favourites that tend to go around the talk radio show circuit, such like Max Egan, Ole Damagard. We've had them on. Guys like Mark Devlin talking about mind control in the music industry and the hip hop revolution, if you like. But we try and do things just that little bit differently, you know. Get out to quite a few meetups as well and try and meet as many people who are at the kind of cutting edge of bringing out information and try and get them to come on and talk to us as well.
Well, you know, and the other interesting thing here is that I've really not gotten deep into the subject that probably first turned me to this sort of media, where you're talking about UFOs from the time of, you know, you were a child. Really, to me, it was the occult. It was the esoteric aspects of life that really got me starting to study things and got me into debunking, actually, very early on as a child, because you know, many a legend, an interesting account turns out to be a bunch of garbage. But once you're done sifting through all the nonsense, okay, and I find the same thing with the UFO crowd, quite honestly, which is why I haven't touched on it very much on this show. But I've had on like James Bartley and Richard Dolan and people like that to discuss it. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting topic, but a lot of it is just, I don't know, just seemingly nonsense. And I say that also with the you know, the supernatural, let's call it. I even hate to call it supernatural. You know that, Andy? Because, quite honestly, it's nature. It just appears super to other people because they have their eyes shut to it quite often. But really, honestly, a great deal of supernatural, again, holding up air quotes, things happen on a daily basis. I mean, one who denies even the existence of a lot of that, say someone who is a devout Christian, must also at the same time understand that there is a supernatural quality toward that can be attributed to group prayer, let's say. Okay?
Yeah.
And group prayer, now this is a provable thing, that if a bunch of people pray over something, it does have an effect. And that in and of itself is magical, really, if one takes an objective viewpoint about it. Collectively chanting, collectively thinking, collectively gathering together your intention can create an effect in the world without you lifting a finger.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And really, I think we're seeing quite a lot of evidence of that over here, particularly. I don't know what it's like on your side of the pond, but particularly in the ufology field at the minute, there's all kinds of rows broken out between leading figures, and really it's just dividing the community terribly. And I went to a meeting that was UFOs and paranormal this last weekend at St Anne's up near Blackpool in the north of England. A fantastic crowd of people there, but so much of the conversation was taken up with this divide that's come about in the community, and it really is if you like, people talk about co-creating. They are co-creating a situation of their own misery, and I really feel like grabbing older people and banging their heads together, to be honest.
Mm. No, and it is interesting, and there's a lot of subdivision, and like I said, there's a lot of misunderstanding about these kinds of things. Like, for instance, you'll find people, and why do I bring up the whole supernatural aspect and religion and all that? There are people that will swear up and down that, aliens are a figment of somebody's imagination. But at the same time, they have a staunch belief that demon possession, demonic influence, elemental creations from the other side, are at all times in play in this world. And they don't recognize that it's quite possible that these are one and the same. And besides that, if something is not generally seen on the scene, if you will, wouldn't it be logical that you could call that alien? So even a demon could be an alien, and an alien could be a demon. You know what I'm saying? I've always found that odd that a lot of people don't want to embrace that sort of idea. What do you think? Yeah,
I've always been fascinated by that. Are ETs demons? Are angels ETs? Are ETs angels? It is a very difficult one, and I think a lot of that is to do with your mindset when you approach it. I keep an open mind about who these visitors are and where they come from, because I don't damn well know, and I don't know anybody who's been able to prove it to me. And until such time as I do, I'm going to keep an open mind about it. For all I know, these beings could already have been here for thousands of years. They may not have come from anywhere. They might be from a different dimension or a different time rather than a different place.
Well, right, and even the projection of someone else's intention, right, which is fascinating again, because a lot of people believe that you'll manifest, terrible things, or you'll manifest bad luck, or you'll manifest, various gremlin-like entities one way or another. You'll bring it on yourself. You'll bring the dharma upon you through the karma. You know what I mean? And this prevails through a lot of people's, belief structures, and yet they won't apply it to the possibilities of, full-blown other creatures and stuff like this being possible. Now, with all that said, when you take a look at things like cryptozoology, sometimes it proves to be really interesting. We discover things like the giant squid are real, right? Mm. We discover things like there is, in fact, and indeed, a creature that very much resembles, this or that or the third thing. And yet nobody can find Bigfoot. Despite the fact that the whole world is covered with cameras and we have Google Earth and so on and so forth. No Bigfoot still, but who knows? Keep looking. You know what I mean?
Well, we still keep getting the odd film on YouTube of somebody who's spotted Bigfoot. I saw one went up this week. I've got some friends in Scotland, and there was quite a lot of investigation going up in Scotland, because there do seem to have been quite a few sightings of Bigfoot up there. So we've got him over this side of the pond. You haven't just got him to yourself over there,
Mm. No, I got you. And, of course, when I think of Scotland, I think of Loch Ness, right? Mm-hmm. And that whole phenomena. And here's the interesting thing, too, is that when one studies the esoteric, all right, occasionally you discover that people, by continuously referencing something or continuously creating it in an artistic sense one way or another, whether it is a creation in order to drive, tourism or whatever else, sometimes these things wind up coming to fruition in one odd way or another, and people don't want to think about that part of the holographic reality, do they?
Oh, no. No, I mean, that conference we went to at the weekend, there was a fascinating young lady speaking there. And from the top of my head, her name was Dr. Jenny Butler, and she was from the University of Cork, and she was studying religion, mythology, and beliefs, and she did a fascinating talk about the various different categories of non-ordinary beings. She didn't want to say paranormal or supernatural because they all have certain connotations in the wording. So she used this phrase, non-ordinary beings. And of course, being from Ireland, she couldn't not mention the fairies. So we learnt a little bit there about what the Irish perception of fairies is, perhaps as opposed to the Disneyfication of fairies. And,
you know what, Andy, before you go any further, why don't you do the audience a favor? Because here's something I never think of. Quite honestly, in the U.S., nobody really knows that there's more than one concept of fairies, generally speaking. They think of them as the Dungeons and Dragons version, maybe, and then it's Tinkerbell. That's all they know here. Why don't you explain what you mean by the Irish concept of fairies just a little bit?
Well, a lot of people seem to think that fairies are only little tiny beings, where in Irish beliefs, I believe that fairies can be as big, if not bigger, than humans. And there's some quite strange things go on there. People are taken by the fairies, and they can be taken by the fairies and be there for what seems like a day or a couple of days or a week, and come back and 100 or 1,000 years has passed and everyone they know is dead. And some quite incredible stories from the fairy lore of Ireland. But this lady was explaining how, because we've all got a different cultural standpoint and we see the world through the eyes that we've been educated to see them through, then we all see them in a slightly different way depending on what cultural background we come from. So right. I suppose you could explain that if you went back sort of 300-400 years ago and a spaceship landed. Nobody had the word spaceship then, so they would have called it a fiery chariot or a burning bush or something like that, wouldn't they?
Oh, right. And then, of course, an angel instead of an alien, possibly. And I always think about that kind of stuff. Exactly. And it is interesting that we talk here about the cultural lens, because I definitely want to get into that, okay, as we go forward. I think that this is an extremely valuable part of the discussion we need to have. There is a difference, regardless of what you want to say. Yes, people are all people, and we all have our superstitions, and we all have our culturally based programming one way or another. Okay, even the mere concept that we are, to live together collectively and all this is cultural programming. Are we interactive creatures? It seems to me that by our natures we are. It seems to me that we are storytelling creatures across the board. And I'm talking about the more ordinary creature of man. Okay. I do like how she put that, though, the non-ordinary creatures. That's fascinating because that covers such an incredible wealth of lore and confusing, really, mythos out there because, sometimes you have blended fact and fantasy that come together to create a story. And then eventually we find that there are things that are relatable to it. Like I said, those giant squid, for instance, the sea monster concept. This is something that sailors talked about for generations, long before America was a country. This was going on. And meanwhile, it was thought to be that of the delusions of individuals who were probably starving as they were stuck, lost out in the middle of the ocean. But we come to find out later that these creatures actually exist. There are tremendously large mammals, and who knows actually what goes even further down in some parts of the ocean. We still haven't even explored our entire ocean. And meanwhile, the universe appears to me to be a large place. Maybe it's just my perspective, and who knows, maybe it's just my poor eyesight. But when you think about all of the endless mathematical combinations that could have come together to form various creatures, societies, et cetera, and then when we imagine the concept that time may not necessarily be a linear thing, all of the old rules kind of go out the window. And I've always found this to be a fascinating exploration, from nearly every angle where someone takes it seriously. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, I feel it's a fascinating subject, and there is so much to go into. For me, there is so much about what we've been taught and conditioned in this world that is quite clearly hogwash, that it almost makes what is real one of the most fascinating subjects, because who is really to say what is real? Because we're told that, right, okay, this table in front of me, it's solid, but we know that the table is made of atoms, and each one of those atoms 9.99999% empty space. So there is no real solid object that's at the table. So much about how we perceive the world comes from within ourselves, and it's almost like, are we observing the world, or are we creating it by our observation?
Yeah, and that's always the grand argument, too, is that, have you actually been able to observe something without affecting the outcome, because by your observation you might have actually changed it. This has always been one of those interesting scientific questions as well, which I dare say we don't have answers for at this point. So I say again, it's worthy of exploration. And I know we've gone into kind of a strange area here, Andy, but I love having these sorts of open discussions, because it's good to see where somebody stands, and good to see where they're coming from. Because meanwhile, like I was saying, guys, when Andy does his broadcast, for the most part, we get to hear a lot about, the things that are going on in the world, ostensibly, from a different angle, from a different perspective. I mean, you analyze the news and the events of the day in a different way, just like I do. And, it's great to see that, but it's also great to see that you also have an open mind regarding, look, outer space, inner space, all of these things are meant to be questioned in one way or another. And after all, could this all simply be a bunch of figments of my own imagination, and every other thing out there is just a projection of some part of my ego? Who knows? Because if that were true, how would you tell the difference after all? Isn't that a fascinating? I know it's a kind of a megalomaniac sort of point of view and all that kind of stuff, but kind of valid too, right?
Well, yeah, and then you start to look at different angles, like, are we living in a hologram? Are we in some giant computer simulation? And how the hell would you know if you were? But there does seem to be some kind of computer code that is fundamental with the mathematics of the way the universe operates. So how did that get there?
And then again, if you think about it as computer code, and let's just say there were programmers, are the programmers actually the gods? And then, in fact, who are the programmers of the program, and how many loops do we have to make before we get to the end of the line? It becomes an interesting study and an interesting exercise intellectually. But at the same time, even if we don't explore these sort of esoteric concepts, if we don't explore these sort of free-thinking concepts, we're still stuck with a pretty confusing place called planet Earth at the same time, right? And by the way,
it's very confusing from time to time, I know.
Absolutely. And by the way, guys, if you want to join into the discussion tonight, which I assure you will go in many directions, the number to call is 218-339-8525. Of course, that's a United States number, but 218-339-8525. And if you're catching this during the live show, which is 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, and 5 to 7 Pacific in the U.S., and you want to call in and join into the discussion, you're more than welcome. The phone lines are open, and I have control of them. So, yeah, you guys can do that as well. So meanwhile, Andy, what was kind of on your mind when we were getting ready to come on this show tonight? Because I think you and I could endlessly have the discussion about what could be the possibilities here of the holographic reality. And I could talk to you about how I'm starting to come to an understanding that there's sort of a big bowl of soup here, and I seem to be just a chunk of chicken floating in it. But, But what was on your mind when we were getting ready to come on air? Because I always like to know what it is you thought you were going to bring to the show tonight.
Well, something I thought we'd probably end up discussing, and I really don't know what to make of it, is the big news this week that USA and Russia are trying their damnedest to start World War III, or so it appears, or so we're told from the mainstream media. Now, is that a reality? I don't know. What do you think, Chuck?
Well, what's funny to me is that in reality we are very, very close to what I always understood as the technical definition of a world war anyway, regardless of the intent of the alleged superpower USA, and which is an interesting empire that spreads itself across the planet quite prodigiously. But anyway, dealing with the now Russian Federation. Okay, not the former Soviet Republic or anything, but the Russian Federation, and having these interactions, quite honestly, for the past 2 years, we've been aware that there have been these, very near misses, very near miss type scrapes that our militaries are getting involved in. The Chinese confronting American air assets and nearly firing at each other as early as, I don't know, in my recollection, I can think back to 2013. I think I was first hearing these sorts of reports, and that was long before people started talking about ISIS as the great crisis. And the Middle East wasn't quite as fractured as it is now, although, we never did quite leave Iraq, and we never did quite leave Afghanistan, and who knows what's really going on throughout the African continent, because there's quite a blackout there. But anyway, what does it actually mean to go into World War III? So I guess we should kind of define what a world war would be. So what do you think it is, Andy, off the top of your head?
I don't suppose I know what the technical definition is. The thing that's kind of been piquing my interest is the mention of the intended use of tactical nuclear weapons, which I think is a big concern for everybody. Yes, I know they've been threatened to use these things as pretty much as long as I've been on the planet, which is 53 years ago as of today.
Yes, happy birthday, by the way, Andy.
Oh, yeah. I actually forgot it was my birthday until I started getting a load of Skype messages at midnight. So, yeah, once you get over 50, it's not worth bothering with. Trust me. But, no, Sorry, I've lost my thread there, Chuck.
It's all right. Look, you were saying that the technical definition of a world war, what would that be? Well, and you bring in the idea that the nuclear aspect being brought into the equation might actually tip the scales, but I don't think so. You didn't require nuclear weapons in order to have World War I. You didn't require nuclear weapons to have the majority of World War II. No one would dispute either one of those statements.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I would say that it's not a prerequisite to have the nuclear component introduced into the conflict to declare a world war. What is a world war? Well, people's definitions vary quite a bit. But I mean, if you were left to define it, Andy, what would you say a world war is? How about that? Forget about other people's definitions. What would you say it is?
Well, I suppose for me, a world war would be a war that involves pretty much every country in the world. And I suppose, like you say, we're not far from that at this moment, are we?
Well, no, when you have occupations, okay, occupations of various nations by foreign entities all across the globe. You have the presence, again, which I point out constantly. There's approximately 190 nations on the planet. Now, it depends because, certain nations will fall, be annexed, turned over to others, whatever, on a daily basis, believe it or not. So it does vary day to day. But in approximately 170 out of 190 nations, according to the math I last checked, the United States military-industrial complex has a presence, which, sounds to me like empire and does smack of my earlier studies of what was allegedly the Roman Empire and all of that. But meanwhile, I'm getting away from what a world war is, right? So the standard textbook definition, okay, because I'll give you this one, is a war involving many larger nations in all different parts of the world. This name is commonly given to the wars of 1914 to 1918 and 1939 to 1945, although only the second of these was truly global. Now, that's your standard if you just go into Google and go get yourself a definition. But the reality here is that how much of the globe was really involved in conflict during what we called World War II, how much of the globe was really in conflict during what we called World War I, and are we not, in a geographical sense, already in that state on this planet based on the daily clashes, daily conflicts that are underreported? People talk about Afghanistan, and I do all the time, and people talk about Iraq, and the various Middle Eastern clashes, around the Syrian question, so on and so forth. But in reality, there are many military engagements, let's call them, all over the globe that are not being reported by anybody's news agency, and I don't care if they're alternative, corporate, local, national, international, it doesn't really matter. Nobody is even bothering to report all of what's happening. So, despite the fact that we have the ability to know every single thing on the planet, we're not utilizing it collectively as a species. Fact is, it's possible that we're already in the state of covering enough ground on the planet that we're in World War III. Now, it hasn't been declared. Nobody wants to use that term because, after all, I think World War III was predestined according to what they taught us, and you're a little bit older than me. But according to what they taught us, if you remember when we were growing up, basically, when it does come time for World War III, it will be a nuclear engagement. It will be the atomic war. It will be a hydrogen war, depending on who you were talking to, right? It would be the grand weapons of mass destruction that would be deployed. And the devastation to the human species would be absolutely immeasurable. Not as though we didn't do a good enough job in 1914 to 1918 and 1930 to 1945. Not as though we didn't do a good enough job killing millions and millions of people all across the planet and so on and so forth in our world wars. I'm holding up air quotes. Not as though we didn't do a good enough job there, but isn't that really what they taught us World War III would have to be?
Yeah, I mean, although we're getting all this saber rattling, I kind of grew up with the constant saber rattling of the Cold War. You know, we were getting these films played out at school where if a bomb drops, you need to just go and hide under your desk and you'll be okay.
Oh God, duck and cover, yeah.
Yeah, that's the one, yeah. And I kind of, all the way through that, I was as alarmed as anyone else. But as I got a little bit older, I started to think, well, really? You know, these two massive global superpowers were at war all this time and nothing really happened? Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? It's almost like it was just some kind of display to keep us all in our place, to keep us all in constant fear.
Right. Right. And what's interesting here is, of course, those of us outside of remember the term the Iron Curtain, right? All those of us on the outside of the alleged Iron Curtain were taught to believe that if you went into there, you'd have to deal with a totalitarian government. You'd have to deal with a government that doesn't care about its people. You'll starve. They don't care about you. You will never, you can never achieve anything there because you are a predestined to what it is you're held down, you're never able to advance in that world, et cetera, et cetera. They are evil all the way around. Their secret police keep track of everything you do. You know, Andy, it kind of sounds like what we have on the alleged other side of that Iron Curtain today in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I remember when the Iron Curtain was still in place, I worked as a mechanic for a motorcycle racing team, and I travelled behind the Iron Curtain, and yeah, some of what was said was true, but a lot of what was said about life behind the Iron Curtain was complete rubbish.
Right.
Yes, there were shortages of certain things, and there were certain freedoms that were curtailed. But on the whole, people seemed to lead a pretty normal life, the same as we did. There were some things they couldn't do because of the country they were living in or the laws that we were living under, but it wasn't anything like what we were told, and I've found that more and more as I've travelled to different places. The impression that you're given before you get there never bears any reality when you actually arrive and have a look around the place, particularly when you go off the beaten track and talk to the local people.
And you know what's fascinating, too, is that when I talked to some people that were on the other side of this equation when we were younger, they were being told virtually the same story. That those people on the outside of this Iron Curtain, which they called it something else, they were not interested in doing anything for the good of others. They were just these selfish creatures who would absolutely abandon and punish you because there is no sort of sympathy or decency that they would have, and they are in fact a savage enemy that you should fear, pretty much like we had to deal with the communist boogeyman on this side of the curtain. Over there, they were dealing with the capitalist boogeyman, who was all about the oppression of the poor and beating down on anyone who didn't have the riches to thrive, right? Which is kind of fascinating because, once again, some of what they were saying was true.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Chuck.
Well, I was just going to say it's fascinating to me that the propaganda is never really a fully developed lie. It's never a complete lie. There's always some truth mixed in with the fear porn tactics. And today, even though people seem to be more aware of that, they still don't quite get it. do they? It's kind of odd. It's like they should be able to more easily recognize that they're being influenced by the politics of fear, that they're being influenced by the social normalization of fear, and yet that's not what's happening in the majority of the population. They don't get it. They don't realize that they're literally being fed a bunch of garbage to dictate to their own predetermined sentimentality and to push them in directions so that they keep busy working on the hamster wheel instead of looking at the world around them, instead of connecting with other people. They're becoming more disjointed, more disconnected, and more distorted in their view of the world. Without ever realizing it. I mean, do you notice the same thing?
Yeah, I do notice that. And if I could borrow one of Tony's phrases, Tony so often says that most people are not prepared to look at any of these issues until it comes knocking on their door, until it comes to your door and it's your children they're trying to take, or your home they're trying to take, or your liberty they're trying to take. Then people start to sit up and take notice, but not before.
I mean, is it that we're just unobservant as creatures on the whole? I mean, of course, I don't mean you and me, but I mean, in mass, does it seem as though we're just unobservant, or are we just that callous that we don't care about a damn thing unless it has to do with us? Are we that egocentric? Are we that self-centered? Or do you think it's just a lack of comprehension, or is it really truly cognitive dissonance, in which case you can see it, you can smell it, you can taste it, but you're going to deny it's there anyway? I mean, what do you think it is?
I think you probably hit the nail on the head there with the cognitive dissonance. I think it's just to acknowledge the reality that everything you've ever been taught is a lie, and that the whole system that you've lived your life under is flawed and not designed to work in your favor is so big to take on for some people, particularly when they are working 40, 50, 60 hours a week to try and keep food on the table for their families, that they feel like if they took their foot off the gas and paid attention to what's really going on, their whole world would just crumble around them.
You know, and it just might. It just might, because I think that quite often if people really had to understand, okay, if people really had to understand what's going on in the world around them, I think that if they had even a shred of empathy left in their beings, they would be compelled to do something. You know, to do something that is not necessarily just based on, it's kind of like cognitive dissonance mixed with the selfish, self-centered, you know, the entire universe revolves around me and my problems kind of attitude. I think it's a combination of the two, because if they were to have to break their pre-programmed ignorance, if they were to have to break their cognitive dissonance, then they would be faced with the idea that they have been, complicit in really a lot of ugly things that they definitely wouldn't necessarily. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. For me, the whole discovering that the world is not what you thought it was, it's a massive step, and I think almost it seems like a lot of people they've got to almost lose everything to find that truth. I've talked with so many people, and they said, "Oh, I never got it. I never got it." And then suddenly my world fell apart, and then I got it. And it's whether people have had relationships break up, they've lost jobs, they've lost homes, they've lost their health, they've had a nervous breakdown. But so many people just do not get it at all until the world just falls apart around them, and then suddenly it all comes into very sharp focus.
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, once the universe humbles you in one way or another, and I can speak to this personally, until the universe absolutely humbles you, you don't really take the time to truly examine what's important, I think. This has happened to a lot of us. I mean, look, I can speak from my own personal experience. I don't want to get too deep into it, but who knows? Maybe in the second hour, that's what we'll do. Andy, we'll talk about our personal reasons for why it is we came to this. How about that? Because, this is a meaningful discussion. I think that there's a lot of people who are vaguely aware of certain things, and they haven't gotten to that point where, you know what, I've taken enough of a beating, and now I have to examine my wounds and the world around me because there's nothing else left for me to do. Sometimes that's the point you come to. And once again, guys, I'm going to invite you to join into the discussion at 218-339-8525. Once again, that's 218-339-8525. And you know what? If you guys don't want to call in, that's fine. I'll just sit here and talk to Andy for the next hour. That's for sure. I'm more than happy to do that. But I'd love to hear from you guys. See if you have anything to say about what we've discussed tonight so far. And who knows where else we might go. Andy, you have any ideas about what you might want to discuss in the next hour besides what I've just brought up?
I'm quite easy to go wherever you'd like to go, Chuck. I suppose it would be an idea to cover some of what's happening in the sphere of politics on either side of the pond, but that's a dirty business, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be, that's for sure. And, hey, if we want to put everybody to sleep, we can talk about the vice presidential debate. Would you like to do that, Andy?
Well, it's a bit early for going to sleep yet. Yeah.
That's true. But we could talk about the great rumble in the concrete jungle that was supposed to be the Trump-Hillary debate. We could discuss all of that, couldn't we?
Yes, it's quite a non-event, that, wasn't it?
Yeah, I thought so. But hey, you got to do something for ratings if you're out of Atlanta. And by the way, I want to welcome our listeners in Atlanta because I know that people at CNN listen to this show. So greetings to you, greetings to our friends at the NSA and anybody else who has decided to tune in to the Ochelli Effect tonight, whether you be representing a government agency, military intelligence industrial complex agency, or if you're just a private contractor, you are all equally welcome to the show. My guest tonight is Andy Young from RaconteursNews.com. Not Raconteurs.com, by the way, because if you go there, you'll see stuff about wine tasting and I don't know what the hell else, but RaconteursNews.com. And I also want to get your take on a couple of the interesting fellas that are over there on the network. I really want to get Dr. Rock on here, man. I'm really anxious to talk to that guy. Is he still doing shows over there?
Oh, yeah. Dr. Rock did a great show last night. He teamed up with another member of the team, Freeman Jack. He went down to Jack's place last week to rehash his broadcasting equipment because there's quite a few of the members are big on the Linux open source software. Right. So there's quite a few of us don't use Microshaft in any way, shape or form. Unfortunately, I'm still tied into that, but I'm looking at ditching it as soon as I possibly can. So, we had a chat about, what Doc Rock and Jack had been doing down together and, also about, Jack's theories on new humans and it said Jack likens it to the human race being like zebras and donkeys. And I wish I could go into his discussion there in any more depth, but Jack loses me a little bit because he's so bloody good on this.
You know what? Maybe you could do me a favor and get Dr. Rock and Freeman Jack on here because I'd love to hear about that. Now, what's interesting about Linux at this point, by the way, is that broadcasters are having problems utilizing it now because of the way Skype interacts with it. Did you know that?
Yes, I know. Skype is the problem. Of course, Skype is owned by Microsoft, isn't it?
Right. And, you know, Bill Gates is such a wonderful humanitarian. I mean, you would expect that he would, leave something like that quite unfettered so that broadcasters like us could, yeah, I know, I'm being sarcastic, but, hey, look, that's part of what I do on this show. You know, it's fascinating. And meanwhile, you know, Google is cracking down on all of us who are attempting to bring truth forward as best we can in some form of honest media. So quite honestly, Andy, it's getting to be a strange landscape out there. And the tech aspect of it is one thing, but of course, there's a whole lot more to it. And definitely we're going to wind up discussing what happens to you socially when you not only become awake, but become aware and attempt to do something about it. It changes your life. I mean, after all, your humble host tonight is somebody who has effectively almost no one who is willing to brave the rest of his life.
Welcome to Pharmaceutical.
So that's Payday Monsanto bouncing us into the second hour of the Ochelli Effect. Here on American Freedom Radio at AmericanFreedomRadio.com. That is where the live show originates from. And quite honestly, I also see in my Skype chat comments over here that a few of you are over at Ochelli.com, OCHELLI.com, and utilizing the American Freedom Radio player. So glad that is on the front page at my website, and of course the podcast and all that other stuff, and a page where you can donate to my well-being is also there. Do appreciate that. Also, there is a GoFundMe/Ochelli Effect going on now, which is meant to expand the operations. Who knows? Maybe even frighten all you little kiddies out there just before Halloween and begin turning this into a video broadcast. Okay. I know I have a face for radio. But anyway, a guy with a hell of a better voice and a lot better temperament is with me tonight. Andy Young from RaconteursNews.com. I love this guy, and I love Raconteurs News. It's actually an interesting place to hear all sorts of stuff. We did discuss one of the guys I want to get on this show at some point, Dr. Rock. Of course, we've had Tony Hurst on here, and Tony's just one of the most brilliant guys I've ever had on this show. That's for sure in a general sense, and we never even really touched on his specialty, did we? But maybe we'll do that coming up real soon. Who knows? I might even be able to rope Rick Simpson into a show, finally. We'll see what we can do. But anyway, Andy, I kind of want to turn this over to you in a lot of ways right now, because it is so interesting to me how it is that somebody comes to that realization. We talked about how the ego winds up being destroyed because you wind up practically prostrate, laying on your face, okay, because you lose your family, you lose your possessions, you lose your home, all of these things. And now I'm just describing, my entire last year, but you lose all these things. You lose any sort of financial grip on anything you had. You lose just about everything. And for me, I retained a suitcase and the equipment, required to do this broadcast. And here I am sitting in a room by myself most of the time. That's what I do. And it did change my perspective once again. And it was another loss that really preceded me getting into this kind of media. It was I don't know what you would call it. I guess the driving force, that propelling engine that caused me to begin to get into this area of discussion, that caused me to try and examine the things that nobody else wants to, that caused me to try to look into and speak about things that nobody else wants to talk about. But what happened to you, Andy, that caused you, besides, your interest, and okay, you ran into somebody in the media and you had an interest in the allegedly supernatural and whatever else? I mean, had to be something else, though, that got you started talking about, politics from a realistic perspective, world events as if they were actually, reality, as opposed to the fiction that they give us on the great global corp media. It had to have been something that caused you to get into it, and I'm wondering what it was.
Yeah, it's quite difficult because the way I came across into this was almost so gradual. It was like a 1,000 tiny steps, so small that you never noticed any individual step. And I suppose really I could go back about 20 years ago. I was working for my local council as a visiting officer. I used to go out and visit people at their properties if that was required. And a couple of times there, I went to places that I'd never been to before. It's quite a large rural area that I live in. And when I got there, there were people there who greeted me, knowing my name, invited me in for a cup of tea and said, "I've been expecting you." And I didn't even know I was going there myself. So I thought, this is a bit strange. What's going on? And when I was invited in by these people, I was told various things about my life which I couldn't work out how they knew or could possibly have guessed. And the one thing that both of these people told me, quite separately and probably a year or 2 years apart, was that you are here for a special purpose. You're here to be a teacher or a leader. Now, as a lorry driver who'd kind of tried to get into local government, that didn't really make any sense to me. And for almost 20 years afterwards, it never made any sense. And then suddenly I just drifted into talking to people on the radio, and I thought, hang on, that phrase kind of makes sense to me now. So it's almost like the path for me to do this was preordained. All I had to do was sit back and relax and let it all happen. Because it wasn't until my back injury came sufficiently bad after about 30 years that I couldn't work any longer. And I had loads of time on my hand, which I could sit and research the things I'd always been interested in. And then suddenly I got deeper and deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole.
But there wasn't like one sort of earth-shattering thing then, huh?
No, not really. No, it was just so gradual. It really is strange and difficult for me to understand myself. Don't mind explain it to anyone else.
No, that's interesting because, you coming about it gradually really, I think makes a lot of sense with the character you display, because it doesn't seem as though you would rush to judgment on things in general. It just doesn't seem as though it's part of your character. So it's not like somebody grabbed a hold of you one day and shook you and then you said, "Oh, wow, I get it now." You had to be convinced over time that what you were looking at was, a grand scam in one way or another. And I guess it would have to be a gradual process that would bring a guy like you around. I've tried to describe that too. Realistically, I guess I was 19 years old when I first got smacked in the face with, my government lies to me and stuff like that. But it took quite a while before I really understood how loaded, how rigged, how ridiculous the game was. And I mean, in the interim, I was, examining the JFK case for 20 years, and you can't get a better example of something that would tell you that the American government is full of crap than that. But for some odd reason, it just would not sink in that it was everything, everywhere, and the whole thing has been loaded from the beginning. And that propaganda is not only an art form, and not just the reality of the big boogeyman, totalitarian governments we were told about as children, much like the big bad wolf being able to huff and puff and blow your house down. There is a whole lot more to it. And in fact, the people that we thought were on our side are not on our side. We're flying a flag of war as opposed to our civil flag in this country. We've been in a state of emergency since 1933, and nobody bothers to notice. Nobody bothers to notice that the organic constitution has been removed. Nobody bothers to notice that human rights are being decimated across the planet. Nobody bothers to realize that, although we're always talking about being the world's policeman and being on the right side of the issue and being on the moral high ground over here, guess what? We're not. All of that.
Yeah.
it's amazing. I mean, and that's, of course, a very American lens, okay? But what was it like over there? I mean, what was the gradual process where, it's like, wait a minute, the Sex Pistols playing God Save the Queen on the Thames River was pretty interesting, but, what grabbed you? I mean, something had to have given you part of that push, even though it wasn't the big explosion. It wasn't the Big Bang Theory, but it was the gradual evolution, just like it was for me, but something had to have grabbed you at some point, right?
I suppose one thing that was a part of that was, I was married for about 10 years. And during that time, I went from having pretty much nothing to having a nice new house, a bar in Spain, and living out in Spain, which was an absolute dream come true for me. But when my marriage went all pear-shaped, I decided to come back to the UK for a fresh start. I got back here, and it just... I'd always known that things weren't quite as they seemed, but when I came back here and realised that I was on my own, and it was to start again from scratch at age 40 was not the easiest thing to do. But and then I ended up living in shop doorways. I was homeless for about 3 months, and I found a place in a homeless hostel in the town that I'm in now, and I went to this homeless hostel, and it was run by this seemingly benevolent group of people who proudly announced themselves as Christians. And I was in that hostel for several months, and during that time, the other fellows that were staying in there took it upon themselves to discuss their problems with me, because I didn't write all their problems down in a book and pass it on to all the other members of staff. So if they talked to me, it was kept private. And that didn't go down well with the management. So this bunch of Christians that were all supposedly doing people good were decidedly unpleasant, and they went out of their way to convince me that I was losing my mind. And I actually managed to get a member of staff to explain to me what they were doing. One of the members of staff with a bit of empathy. But just little things like that, just a bit here and a bit there, made me realise that so many people in this world are not what they're claiming to be or pretending to be. And the world is not set up to work in our favour. And I thought, well, wonder if we could do anything about this. As one man, it's never easy.
Well, see, now here's the interesting part to me is that, like I said before, you have to come to this sort of realization after being stripped of all of the superficial things that you think are meaningful. That's number one. Number two, it's always interesting that you come to that very same realization. I describe it as the labeling process. Everything in this world that is labeled a certain way is completely deceptive. Your food's not food. Your medicine doesn't cure anything. Your government doesn't represent you. I mean, it's on and on and on. That which is a cult may be a religion. That which is a religion may be a cult. That which is a religion isn't a religion. All of these things going on. And you finally figure out that even your language itself has been turned against you. That's why I love having a guy like Jordan Maxwell on, who starts to explain things like marriage. Notice that always plays into these interesting epiphanies. Your marriage and your collapse thereof always seem to be motivating principles. You ever notice that, Andy, when it comes to being a man in this world?
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
And what's interesting here, of course, is that there is the idea that it's, your business versus their business. You become involved in a contract, which is a contract with the state to figure out how assets have been brought together. You're involved now in a partnership, et cetera, et cetera. All these things are really interesting. The language in and of itself hides the lie in plain sight constantly. It's a medical practice. It's a practice, not actually, an industry that is there to cure anything. You know what I'm saying? It's always interesting when you just even take a look at the words that are used and how their meanings have been turned inside out to the point where you're not sure if you're coming, going, or if you left 3 years ago. It's just it's gotten to that point. And this is usually one of the harsh realizations that hits you when, everything that you thought was of value is now valueless because it's been taken away, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I mean?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm just getting some messages in from people. I'm getting loads of birthday wishes. I've just heard from someone over your side of the pond who's in Charleston, South Carolina, dealing with Hurricane Matthew at the minute. So, yeah, I'd like to say good luck to everyone who's having to deal with that at the minute, and hope you come through it safely, because it looks like it's getting a bit rough out there.
Yeah, well, I'm surprised that we haven't been interrupted during this broadcast because of the increased winds and things like that, where I am too, because I'm not far from South Carolina right now. But it is one of those situations. And it's interesting too, because at any point in time, Mother Nature can turn on us too, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Scary world. I almost wasn't going to bring up Hurricane Matthew, but hey, it has permitted us to finish this broadcast almost. We've only got like 45 minutes left, and it's interesting. Which, by the way, nobody's calling in. I guess I'll shut off the phone lines if you guys don't call in shortly. 218-339-8525, 218-339-8525. If your cell towers have not been blown over by the Category 4 storm that's on the East Coast, we'd love to hear from you. And, hey, you can even give us a live report on the wind or whatever else you like. Doesn't matter. I'm willing to field all calls. The only thing I ask is that you are not allowed to abuse the guest. You are allowed to abuse the host. I accept that fully, and that is just fine. That is my standing rule regarding phone calls. But you know what? If you guys are too busy to call in tonight, I won't even bother. I'll shut them off soon. But if not, the phone lines are open right now, and I'm the one controlling them. Anyway, Andy, it is really good to talk to you about all this stuff, and I know I'm going in a lot of different directions, but hey, let's get down to some of the standard fare. Why not?
Sure.
You want to talk about the selection process? Do you really want to talk about that again?
Oh, do we have to?
No. How about we talk about what's going on that side of the pond? What's going on in the political realm in what I often, I probably shouldn't refer to it this way, but what I often refer to as the UK, which I hate that term because ancestrally I'm, actually more Irish than I am Sicilian, even though my name is Sicilian. So, I'm not fond of the concept of the UK, but what's going on in that region, sir?
Well, it's all gone a bit strange since this Brexit vote. We had a clear mandate to leave the European Union, and all I seem to have heard from government ever since then is, that was just a recommendation from the people. The government have got to decide on it. And are we going to trigger Article 50? Well, maybe not. And then to cap it all, I saw a newspaper headline this weekend, and some of your listeners may remember a British politician from way back called Margaret Thatcher. There was a famous headline,
Thatcher, yes.
"This lady's not for turning." Well, we had that exact same headline on one of the tabloid newspapers with a picture of Theresa May there. And I thought, oh my God, this is what I saw coming. It looks like we're back to the days of Margaret Thatcher, to be honest.
Well, isn't that a bizarre throwback? Because honestly, during the selection process here on the other side of the pond, we are once again faced with, well, an actor who really doesn't have the chops to be president of the United States, once again being run by the GOP. Interesting timing, I think, because if you remember, Ronald Reagan was quite fond of bringing up Maggie Thatcher there. And didn't she become kind of a paragon of feminism worldwide, et cetera? After all, a powerful and decisive woman.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but how do people really remember Margaret Thatcher over there where, you know, she had more of a direct effect? How do they remember her really, Andy?
Well, I remember when she died, there were an awful lot of people celebrating, and the most popular song I saw posted on social media was that song called "Hooray, the Witch is Dead."
Oh, like the Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead, like from the Wizard of Oz? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So she definitely didn't get the Princess Diana treatment, is what you're telling me.
Well, I don't know. Who knows what's happened? You know, we're told one thing, but what do we believe? I don't know. Yeah, Thatcher, she really pushed forward the New World Order. She was right in the pocket of Reagan. But she basically destroyed the unions in this country. I used to be a union member, but it just got to the stage where it wasn't worth paying your union subscriptions because the government just did what they wanted, and the union rolled over and threw their legs in the air and just did whatever the government said. So that it was a complete waste of time.
Sounds like what happened during the very same time period over here. Isn't it interesting that the same thing happens over here that happens over there? Because, you know, everybody remembers Reagan as the great Ronald Reagan over here during his regime, which was, you know, quite honestly 12 years of Bush.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Remember the Reaganomics, yes.
But the destruction of the unions prevails in America as well. I mean, that was when really our industrial base was entirely dismantled. You know, first by destroying the unions, and even though they were corrupt organizations over here, I'm sure you have some version of organized crime that got involved in unions over there as well, because it's a great, you know, cash cow, if you will. But honestly, even with the corruption, they served a purpose up until, you know, stuff like, hey, air traffic controllers, you don't want to go back to work? Well, you're all fired. You know, stuff like that. That was interesting. You know, and meanwhile, it kind of parallels what was happening over there, huh?
Yeah, I was still working as a truck driver in 2000 when we had a dispute over in this country over the fuel prices, and the price of gas over here just went so high, everybody got sick to death of it, and a lot of farmers and road haulage contractors, trucking contractors, just went to the oil refineries, parked their trucks and their tractors outside and closed the refineries down. I was working as a delivery driver for one of the oil companies then, and it was a fascinating time because it came within days of bringing the UK government to his knees, the Tony Blair government that was.
Right.
It was only a series of dirty tricks by the government that actually got those protests shut down. That what they did basically, they removed all the press from the area, and then they told the protesters that there were men, women, and children on the protest that they would, if the gates weren't open by midday the following day, they would create a press blackout, and they would bring riot police in with batons raised.
So you mean
they were going to baton charge men and women. And the guys, there were some big tough guys on that gate of our refinery. They came into our canteen to explain to us what was happening. And these big, tough truck drivers were in tears telling us what's happened. They said, that's it, we're all finished now. Now, we took the deal that was on offer from the government to go out there and to start delivering the fuel again, but that agreement lasted less than 5 minutes, because as soon as we got out of the gate, they turned 180 degrees on the agreement and basically dumped on us from a great height. So from that day forward, I never paid another union subscription.
Yeah, well, there you go. Honestly, at the end of the day, the government now just rolls over top of the people, regardless of their protests, etc. And hey, you know what? You think you're being protected by the press. See, this is why independent media is so important. That, actually going out there and documenting what's happening and not being part of what can be shut down as another arm of the government, as another arm of the great corporation, is extremely important, because if you guys had been able to have the live streams at that time, right, and utilize them with independent journalists, what were they going to be able to do? Well, then they would have had to utilize some sort of technical suppression to cut off all internet feeds in the area and this kind of thing, right? And this has kind of been the engaged warfare ever since the citizen journalist was kind of born in the earliest part of this century, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, even just going back to 2000, when I was, I remember when it first started happening, I was working on a night shift, and I heard that one particular refinery had been closed down by protesters, and that was Stanlow in Cheshire. And I was so incensed that they hadn't shut down our refinery that I went home from my night shift, and because I didn't even do email then, I composed a letter on my PC back then, my Windows 3.1 PC, and I faxed it to 40 different transport companies in my area. I just gave them my first name and my mobile phone number, cell phone, which... looking back on it, probably wasn't that wise, because I was a team leader on the fuel tankers. So when everything was stopped the next day, when they got the refinery closed down, there was me in the office doing extra office work, and every few minutes my phone would keep ringing, and there were these guys on the end of the phone saying, "We're running out of fuel. Where shall we take these trucks and park them?" My boss didn't take kindly to hearing that coming out of my phone. But, yeah, it worked well. I managed to help coordinate a little bit of that. Very nearly lost my job and my junior position through that. But, yeah, I'm pleased I did it.
Well, but here's the thing. I mean, at some point, you have to do something. And when you're being run over by the powers that be, and, you gotta, look, they use this concept over here, the see something, say something nonsense, right? Because if you see something suspicious, you're supposed to report it to the Department of Homeland Security, okay? You're supposed to do that. That new agency that sprung up post 9/11 reality. But anyway, you're supposed to do that. And I say that we need to turn it back on them. And we really do need to begin to speak up. We need to say something when we see something, except the people that we need to be reporting on are those that allegedly hold the reins of power. I think that we need to expose more often this kind of activity. I think it's, again, one of the things that the citizen journalist is meant to do, not just to go on YouTube and describe what kind of dinner they're making tonight, but, actually go out there and say, listen, there's something strange happening here. Here's some footage. Here's what's actually going on. Here's what your local media is not telling you. Here's what the international media is not telling you. And, I think that if we could learn to cooperate a bit more than we have thus far, we may get them, on the run for real. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there is an old saying there, out there, and I see it doing the rounds on Facebook almost on a weekly basis. And I think it is so true, particularly at this moment in time. And that is the one that says, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And that is so true. Because if you don't make a stand about this now, what are you going to tell your children and your grandchildren? Well, yeah, I was around, but I didn't do anything. I thought you'd be okay. I thought you guys would be able to handle it.
Yeah, well, there you go. And, I'm looking in the chat room, and, of course, finally something intelligent is said there. Daniel Lewis Crumpton says, when the people fear their government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. That is an interesting paraphrase from someone else, and I challenge you out there to go look it up. But I think that it's an extremely sound principle. And, look, it's not always guns. I know, in America we're very fond of our guns, but and I don't deny that anyone should have the right to that tool. I got to be honest with you, but at the same time, it is not the only tool. Our ability to utilize our First Amendment, which has many facets and has many principles contained within it, is absolutely necessary. We need to be able to practice our freedom of the press, which is the only industry which is allegedly protected by the Constitution, our freedom of speech, our freedom to follow our own desires. These things are necessary. And I think the more that we utilize the rather convenient mechanisms that the electronic age has presented to us, that the internet age has presented to us, the more we utilize them for this type of true warfare, in my estimation, which is the psychological warfare which must be conducted on a daily basis by those of us who realize that there is something absolutely wrong with the world around us, the better off we will all be. Anyway, sorry, I felt a need to just say that and respond to the intelligent comment in the chat room, which we do have a live chat room at AmericanFreedomRadio.com, and you're welcome to join in there if you're listening right now and take a look at some of the nonsense and some of the intelligence in there. Go right ahead. And also the last call I'm going to make for phone calls, because nobody's calling in, Andy.
No, well, yeah, don't be shy, folks. I don't bite. I know we've got one of our listeners listening, and that's Patrick over in Ireland. He's usually a good one for calling in, but I don't know. Maybe he's not able to call in on international.
Yeah, that might cost him a fortune in Ireland. But Patrick, welcome, man. I love the people. I get messages from people in Ireland all the time, and they really appreciate good information and honesty. And as I said before, ancestrally speaking, I'm more Irish than I am Sicilian. So, it's where my grandparents came from, my friends, not the nicest part of Ireland, not the nicest part of Sicily, and they came to this country and got together. Anyway, it is part of the reality around us. And, Andy, again, I know I talk a lot and I take up a lot of time, but, what else is on your mind today besides, we've gone through quite a bit of interesting, subject matter, I would say. Mm-hmm. And, I would love to hear what else you have on your mind just tonight. I mean, what else, seems to be catching your attention in the world around us?
Well, one of the things that we try and cover as much as we possibly can and which does seem to be making quite a bit of headway at the moment, is various ways that people are challenging the legal system. We have the likes of Paul Webster that will come on occasionally, and he's even stood in for Jason when Jason was off the other week. And Paul talks about how gas, water and electricity are free, and none of us are obliged to pay for those things under a non-commercial agreement. It appears that gas, water and electricity should be provided free of charge to domestic customers. It's only commercial businesses that should pay. And evidence of that, I don't know how it works in your country, is that if you contact your utility company and instead of paying through bank payments, decide that you want a paper bill, what they will send you is, they'll call it a statement, but it will be a letter telling you how much you owe, and at the bottom of that will be a cheque. And that cheque will have your name on it, and it will have an amount in pounds and pence. And that amount is the amount that the utility company would like you to go and pay. But they're already getting paid for it. So if you go and pay again, they're double dipping. So it is a big scam. And Paul's used the Bills of Exchange Act 1882 to explain how this works. And if it works in this country, I'm pretty sure with a bit of tweaking it must work over the pond, because we all work under the same uniform commercial code, don't we?
You know, that is interesting that you bring it up, because I've heard this concept discussed, and quite honestly, most of the people that have talked about it are not willing to come on air and discuss it, because apparently this is one of the big, the big scams that's been pulled on people, that quite honestly, that thing is a check. You need to just know how to endorse it, and therefore the bill is paid. And I find it really bizarre, because after all, what have I done my entire adult life is, either paid my bills or not. And when I don't, they cut off services. That's just the way it goes. And so I really find that concept very difficult to swallow, and I would love to have somebody step by step explain how and why that works. And quite honestly, I've never had anybody come on and be willing to do that.
Well, I'll certainly put you in touch with Paul, because Paul quite often goes to meetings and does talks on his subject of gas, water and electric are free. And he said, but they give me an hour. He said, Andy, I explain it in 10 minutes, and I've probably repeated myself 3 times in those 10 minutes. It is that simple. It's not a complicated argument. You just need to get your head round why it is the way it is. So, yeah, I'll certainly put you in touch with Paul. He's a great guy. I'm sure you'd have a great chat with him.
Well, I would love to do that, and I'd like for him to break down, the origin of this information, possibly give people in America a way to look at it. And, again, we'd have to probably for legal purposes state that we're not advising anybody does this, and all that, because I'm sure people would come after me if we did broadcast it, which is probably why most people have not been willing to come on the show to discuss it. But the fact is, I would love to have somebody go through it step by step, tell us where it comes from, what it means, why it's happening, and maybe answer some questions. And I guarantee you, even though for some reason, Andy, you're not inspiring phone calls tonight, and neither am I, who knows, maybe they're taken up with the hurricane, or maybe I've lost enough listeners recently that nobody wants to call in. But because I know I've driven some female listeners away.
Oh, dear.
Which is sad, because I had a disproportionately large female audience listening to the show. But I kind of aggravated them when I did the, all women are prostitutes show. They got a little bit angry. Andy.
I can see why a few might be angered by that, yes.
Also spurred the most creative death threat I've ever received. A woman named Stacy threatened to castrate me. But, hey, bring it on. That's all I can say to you. But I would love to have Mr. Webster on, that's for sure, Paul, to talk about this and to get people to begin to wrap their minds around it, because here's the thing that I understand also, that quite honestly, you can draw against that straw man corporation. It's not just there for you to be accountable to these alleged bills out there. Mm-hmm. But the fact is that in one form or another, you can basically hand over your bills to the government because they own the straw man that the bills are made out to. And I've heard that concept discussed, but again, nobody wants to come on and discuss it publicly. Have you heard of that as well?
Yes. You can settle bills in that way, yes. Remedy, I suppose, would be that would be a remedy for your bills, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, everything from medical bills to, to all sorts of things can actually be remedied. That's a good word, by the way. Can be remedied in this fashion. And it's really fascinating because I think they have us all deceived into believing a whole lot of different fictions. And I would like to explore it and see how it actually works, all the way through. I love the concept, obviously, but it would be nice to enlighten people and to see what would happen actually if a mass portion of the population turned around and figured out how to remedy these things without killing themselves just to pay for their living. What would happen, do you think, Andy?
Well, we all spend so much of our life working to pay these utility bills that if you suddenly got that pressure lifted off, it's going to make life an awful lot more easy, isn't it? It's going to mean that you can free up time to do the things you want to do, to be creative, to spend time with your family, with your children, with your parents, whatever you want to do.
And what would happen then? You might actually have some time for creativity or to produce something of value or of interest that isn't just based on the profit margin, huh?
Yeah, an interesting concept, wouldn't it?
It would.
But also as well, I mentioned Paul Webster there, and I said that he stood in for Jason. We did a show a couple of weeks back, and we had a police officer from Northern Ireland on called Anthony Carlin, who'd actually been in court trying to prove the fraudulent nature of his mortgage, and the judge committed fraud. So being a police officer, Anthony did his duty and went up and arrested the judge. And for his trouble, he got 36 days in jail and is now delivering pizzas for a living. So it didn't work out terribly well for him at the time, but he's got an industrial tribunal against the police and he's suing them for wrongful dismissal. So Anthony's got a very good case. I mean, we have quite a few cannabis activists on. We've got Nick Redfern on, a guy from Birmingham in the UK who's been living over in Texas for 17 years now, I believe. I met Nick recently at a conference, and he's coming on the 18th. Then we've got Max Stutely on the 25th, who's going to be talking about the glossa and where the language that we use is taken from, the glossa and the styles manuals. That is absolutely fascinating stuff.
No, that's great, because that links directly to what we were talking about earlier, the mislabeling of everything on the planet and the convoluted language that is, hiding much of the truth in plain sight and lying to us at the same time. It's really fascinating, especially the English language directly, but seemingly no language on the planet is immune to this particular problem, let's call it, right?
Well, it's the same group that are running more or less all the countries, I think. So they're pretty much pulling the same scams on the population across the world, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. No, and I love this stuff. And the other thing is, at some point, if you guys get daring, you might haul me back onto another show.
Oh, we're always happy to have you back on, Chuck. We'll get a date fixed.
Any time, Andy, whenever you guys are feeling brave, because lately I don't really, I'm not holding things back anymore, right?
You don't give a rat's ass, yeah?
I'm done giving a damn. That's the way it goes, Let the levee break. Because it's time to take care of some of the rats, and occasionally you gotta flood them out with the truth. That's all there is to it. Again, nothing to lose, so what are you gonna do to me? I'm gonna say what I'm gonna say, I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do, and we're gonna accomplish stuff. Somebody brought up Nydia Tisdale in the chat room recently, and of course she was a guest on this show, and she's a citizen journalist who has been arrested and mistreated in the state of Georgia for filming political speeches, not even commenting on them, by the way, Andy, not even editorializing, just simply memorializing them and putting them up online, if you can believe that. And you know what? We should visit with Nydia again soon. I think she has a lawsuit in process right now, and I'd love to hear what's going on there. So I want to bring that up as well. And who knows what we might do over the next week or two. I think we're going to wind up going into some interesting areas. And somebody just put up the link so you can find out more about Nydia. That's for sure. Anyway, Andy, it's so great to sit down with you. And once again, you can find Raconteurs News on YouTube. You can find it on Spreaker. And hey, why not go to their website as well? RaconteursNews.com. You want to spell that for people though, Andy, just in case they're not looking at something and just listening to us somehow?
Yeah, sure, Chuck. It's Raconteurs News. It's RaconteurSnews.com, and that will find us.
No, absolutely.
The website's gone a bit strange looking today. I'm sure Tony will be able to sort that out when he gets back to it. Tony is our webmaster. Does a great job on the website normally. Seems we're having a bit of a hiccup. It's still working, but it just looks a bit strange today.
That's true. And somebody just put in our chat room the link to the Raconteurs live chat room, which, as you said before, we do replay. This show replays over there, 5 to 7 p.m. your time, which is great. So you guys really hear it the next day, and I'm so happy for every one of you that takes the time to listen. And of course, the feedback that you guys have given to Raconteurs for this show is much appreciated as well. And hey, if you guys have any suggestions or whatever, you can also find me at Ochelli.com, OCHELLI.com. There, I do allow people to publish comments, although I do hold them for review. So if you want to comment on any of the shows, you can do it there. You can do it at the Spreaker channel for Raconteurs. You can, of course, email American Freedom Radio. You can find me on Facebook. Andy is on Facebook. I don't know how approachable you are on Facebook, but I accept every stupid friend request I get anymore. I've gone back into that mode. For a little while, I was cleansing my friends list, but I've started accepting them again.
I'm just a bit wary of the pretty girls with one friend and no pictures.
Oh, yeah, you know what? I love those. The surrogate. We talked about that. I think it was night before last. I was talking about it on this show. How there are many. It's like multiple personality disorder all over the social media at this point, right? It seems like, everybody's got 4 or 5 different profiles, and women are especially prolific with this, so you never know who you're really talking to on social media.
No.
That's the way I see it.
No, it's all good fun, though, isn't it? And I think for me, one of the things with social media, particularly Facebook, is just not take it too seriously. I see so many people on there, they have a small disagreement And rather than agree to disagree, one party seems to dedicate the rest of their life to ruining the other party's life. And I'm thinking, what is the point in that? What are you hoping to achieve with that? Where is that going to lead us to? It's going to lead us nowhere, isn't it?
Yeah, you would think that, virtual conflict might be the thing that people are not concerned with, considering the fact that they're being starved to death, beaten to death by the financial system, oppressed by their own governments, and controlled by their mass media. You might think they have something better to do than to piss and moan about how ugly somebody's cat picture is, or if somebody looks good in their dress, or if maybe they shouldn't have eaten at that particular restaurant and taken a picture of their food at that particular angle, and all the other nonsense that we see out there. But you know what? I guess people need something to do with their time when they're not playing Candy Crush. So, it is interesting though, Andy. And yeah, I would say don't take any of it too seriously. As a matter of fact, not just the virtual world, but don't take the world around you too seriously, because if you get into all the ugliness and that's the only thing that you focus on, after a while you're going to feel pretty well oppressed, and it'll be you oppressing yourself. Because you have chosen to focus on only the ugliness around you. There is a great deal more to the world to be presented, and that is part of what we attempt to do on this show. So, for those who maybe don't like the fact that I've gotten more into my smart-ass comments lately, for those who don't like the fact that I've made slightly bombastic statements lately, guess what? You can go somewhere else if you like. It's not a problem for me. Andy, I know you don't necessarily want to chime in on that, but go ahead anyway.
Well, like I say, you're more than welcome back on RN anytime. We'd be glad to fix up a date with you as soon as we can. We're free from November, so we'll sort something out, Chuck.
Sounds good. And you know what? November, of course, will be a busy month for me because everybody will want to talk to me about the JFK assassination again. So,
Oh, yeah, of course.
Which drives me crazy because it seems like I just keep repeating myself over and over and over again. And I don't know how much progress I've made out there, but hey, let's just remember everything has been mislabeled, and you have been misled, and your history books don't tell you about the history, but they do give you a narrative in one way or another, and who knows how much truth is in fiction and how much fiction is in the truth when it comes to the media in general, and it doesn't matter how they print it or broadcast it. You need to question everything. But once again, Andy Young has been our guest tonight, and I really do appreciate you joining us, sir. It is always an adventure, no matter what it is we discuss. And as per usual, no script, no plan. We just went with it. What do you think, Andy? Any closing thoughts?
No, I'd just like to say thanks for inviting us on again, Chuck. Love to get you back on Raconteurs News sometime. I always love these chats. If it comes down to something that's a bit scripted, I'm never quite sure how it's going to work out. But I know if there's no script, there's no excuse, is there?
That's right. And one thing that we're not going to make on this show or on Raconteurs News, I'll speak for both right now, is excuses. There will be no excuses. There may be honest mistakes on occasion, but they will be honest. And this is what we do. So I love it, man. You know, the unsweetened, unvarnished news. Definitely check out Andy Young. And like I said, you know, find him wherever you can. There is a Spreaker channel for Raconteurs. There is also, you know, the YouTube channel. And obviously, guys, once more, I'll say that you go to GoFundMe/Ochelli Effect. That will help to expand what it is that I'm doing. And who knows? Who knows who I might partner with next?
Wow. That sounds exciting, Chuck.
Well, there's that. There's the website, Ochelli.com. But look, that wasn't the feature for tonight. The real deal was I wanted to kind of get to know Andy all by himself, because it's the first time that Andy's been on a show just with me, you know, where we didn't have a third person or a round table. And really appreciate it, and also need to salute you for your bravery for stepping in with a loudmouth like me. So thanks again, sir.
Anytime, Chuck. Always a pleasure. Thanks for inviting us on, and thanks to all your listeners for listening.
Absolutely. Did I say Streaker channel? I thought I said Spreaker, but who knows? You know, there's a couple of teeth missing. I recently had another one extracted. I might have screwed it up. Again, honest mistakes. And yeah, I know I'm looking at the chat room and just answering back to it like an idiot. But anyway, Spreaker, yes, Spreaker. You can find that there is the Ochelli Effect gets posted there. You can find that Andy's show gets posted there. Dr. Rock, all these guys from over at Rack and Tours, and it is definitely worth your time and worth a search, I assure you. And that's that for the evening. Guys, I will see you on Monday, and hopefully Sherry Wisdom will have the courage to join me, because who knows where I'm going to drag that poor little girl next. But hey, once again, Andy, thanks so much.
Thanks, Chuck.
Everybody have a good night, and stay tuned to American Freedom Radio. You know, I think actually Sherry is supposed to be up after me live, so enjoy Elemental Evolution. I will. Have a good night, everybody.